What does it mean to be an empowered woman? Hello and welcome to a new episode of Wempower Podcast. We are here today with Lyanne Nicholl, CEO of 50/50 Parliament. 50/50 Parliament vision is clear: to achieve a properly inclusive gender-balanced democracy in which women have equal seats and equal say. A democracy in which women and men work together in equal numbers to build the country's future. Thank you very much, Lyanne, for being with us today. It's such a pleasure to have you on Wempower Podcast.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
The reason why we are here today to have this conversation is to shed a light on the role of women in politics, the incredible work and achievements of 50/50 Parliament, and also to discover more about your story. In 2024, which is a very important year for election, half of the world population is going to vote. So it's quite important for us to have this conversation today and to acknowledge the achievements of women in politics so far, but also to understand what needs to be done more to make sure we have an equitable society and women are actually truly represented in politics. If you have been following us for a while, you know that Wempower is all about stories. So what I want to ask you first is, who is Lyanne?
Who is Lyanne? Okay, so I am a 44-year-old mother of two boys. I'm from the north of England, which you might not be able to tell so much anymore because I moved down south, or moved around quite a lot. And I originally trained as an actor. And that was my dream. I did quite a lot of theatre and education, which is quite political in itself. And then I fell into the charity sector, but realised I absolutely loved working in the charity sector, in the third sector. Really sort of took me back to some of the stuff that I was really interested in my youth. And yeah, through that sort of found a path through lots of different charities. I've worked right across a really broad scope of charities, including Birthrights, which is a fantastic charity for women. I worked a little with Electa, and I've worked with veterans and children with epilepsy and all sorts of different areas where people need help or there is injustice.
This is such a diverse experience. I am so curious to know as well how your previous experience and life as an actress influenced the way you show up today in the world and the work you're also doing. But we'll leave this for later. There is a question that I like to ask all my guests. It's a little bit controversial, but I know you saw this already when I shared the question with you, so it shouldn't come as a surprise. And my question is, what is that you're fighting for today?
Oh gosh. Well, we're fighting for an equal voice. I can't quite believe still that it's 2024 and some of the things that women are still having to put up with and still having to insist that we should be in the room to help shape the policies that affect our lives. I sort of can't believe we are in a position where 50/50 needs to exist. I don't think it should need to exist, but we do. It's bonkers, actually, that it's controversial to be seeking equality. That people think it's an open-ended question. It isn't. It's fairness, and I'll fight tooth and nail for that.
That's such an important fight, and here at Wempower, we want to support you and we want to amplify it. And it's, as you say, I can't believe that in 2024 we still need to have conversation about how little women are represented and acknowledged in society. And this applies to every field. But as I said, we stand with you in this fight, and we want to create spaces like this where we have conversations on what does it mean to be a woman in politics today, what are the risks as well, and how we can create an environment that is as safe as possible for women to thrive. I'm curious to know, Lyanne, you have over 17 years of experience in the charity sector, and now you are the CEO of 50/50 Parliament, which has a big impact on women in politics. So my question is, has politics always played an important role in your life? Was it there even before you started working in the charity sector? Yeah, tell me more about this relationship between you and politics.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this question, and I'd say that activism, yeah, I think I've always had that streak. I have always looked to see if I can make a difference with things, and been quite political as a person, but without realizing it. And I think all of us don't realize how political we are, because everything that happens in your life, from your getting your doctor's appointment to things like whether you can access IVF, to your salary, to the education system, it's all rooted in how we are governed. So from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, politics is affecting your life. And I think that it's really important that we all realize we're political, because a lot of people say, I'm not political and I don't do politics. And I think what they mean is they find the conversation around political parties and voting who they vote for uncomfortable, which it can be. And I talk about that in a podcast that I have as well, called This is Awkward. And it can be awkward. So I would have said, as a youth, I would have said I'm not interested in politics at all. And wasn't from a particularly political upbringing. But I think there's a few things. When I had my son, my first son, 9 years ago, and experienced really pretty bad postnatal care in this country, I think that politicized me a lot. And I was thinking about who was making policy that affected women, and how come we are completely abandoned after we've given birth. So that really politicized me, and actually became a postnatal healthcare campaigner. But equally, it's sort of in parallel, I got into podcasts. So there's this wonderful podcast I don't think runs anymore, called Mothers of Invention, about women who are tackling climate crisis. And I just became really passionate about that. And that obviously feeds so much into what's going on in global politics. And then there's been a few podcasts popping up in the last few years which have been very political, and I just became a bit of a political junkie, and I was so interested in who is in the room and who is shaping our legislation and policy, and dismayed at the lack of women's representation, and really very firmly believe that we have tried as a society lots of different things to make life better for people, but we have never had the opportunity of experiencing life under gender balanced parliament. We don't know yet. There's lots of research from other countries, predominantly, and corporate world, about gender balance and how it helps improve outcomes for people. But we haven't had that in the UK, and I really want to see what happens to our society, what positive impact, and I really do believe it would be a positive impact, a gender balanced parliament would have on everybody, not just women and girls, but everybody. So yeah, I became very invested in it, and joined 50/50 Parliament as their new CEO in November last year, and it's been a whirlwind.
Can we say that you couldn't choose a better time then to get into politics, considering the elections we recently had in the UK, and also, some very important changes on the political level. So quite an interesting time to be taking this step. For the people that are following us today, and perhaps they're not familiar with the mission of 50/50 Parliament, would you like to tell us a little bit more about it?
Absolutely. So our end game, our goal is to make sure that we sort of are not needed anymore, that we don't need to exist anymore. We want to get to a 50/50 Parliament, so 50% men, 50% women. That is sustained and sustainable, as in the environment within Parliament is somewhere where women can thrive and they can retain talented women. And we do that. We're a registered charity, and one of our objectives is to raise awareness about the gender imbalance on elected bodies, so that's councils and Parliament, and also to inspire and support women to take their first steps in their political careers. And on top of that, we do feel we have a duty to try and influence positive change within these elected bodies, that make sure that it is a place where women can thrive.
Would you like to share with us the steps forward in terms of women's political participation and representation, and the changes that we still need to see happen?
So we have seen a really dramatic increase since Francis Scott set up 50/50 Parliament in 2013. We've seen a 12% increase in women's representation, which is a good step forward. In the last election, we saw a 6% increase. Just over 6%. So from 34% to just over 40%. So getting to that 40% has been a real cause for celebration. It's the first time that we've reached that milestone. It's the greatest number of women in Parliament so far, who are going to be forming a women's caucus, which will also be very beneficial and taking things forward, I think. So we are getting there. And the picture with regards to the candidates is skewed because of the different dynamics within each party. So yes, the number of overall women candidates fell. It's 30%, and that's really dismaying. And it's something that 50/50 and the other organisations in this sector are really keeping an eye on, because we do not want to go backwards from 40%. That would be incredibly depressing and demoralising for everybody. And, it's not progress, it's the opposite. So the 30% was because Labour did very well with their women's representation, and they won by a landslide. So that was the 40% in Parliament. The Green Party are doing pretty well. None of them are at 50%, by the way. So they could all do better. The Green Party and Labour sort of had, I think, between 46, 47% women. So they're getting there. The Liberal Democrats, I know, have tried really, really hard, but their numbers fell to 37%, I think it was, women candidates. Please, if you're from that party and I'm getting the numbers wrong, please feel free to correct me, but I think they're right. And then with the Conservatives, I think they sort of stagnated around 30%. And again, there's really good initiatives within the Conservative Party, like the Conservative Women's Organisation and Women to Win, and that there are moves. But I think we need to really focus on what is the one thing that works, and that tends to be all women shortlists. So I think maybe that should be explored again, as it was with Labour, which is why they got to 50/50 a few years ago. And I will shout out to Labour. I'm pretty sure the cabinet is 50/50. So there are really positive things happening. And then we also had Reform, which fielded much more candidates than before. And their women's representation, I believe, was 16%. So that sort of, once all those percentages are put together, even though a couple of the parties are almost at 50/50, it sort of drags it down. There are a lot of women. We have 8,000 women in our network. We have 3,000 women who have signed up to stand. There are talented, brave, bright women who are ready. So why have we got this huge number of women who are ready, but the candidate selections, we're still lagging? So we've got to have a look at what's happening with the candidate selections, because that's the hurdle that women are falling on. We just mentioned resources, so I'm going to plug a resource that ourselves, 50/50, and our sister organisation, Elect Her, did together, which is party handbooks, which are really helpful. They're on both of our websites for women to have a look at if they are have an inkling they might be interested in getting involved in politics, and that sort of helps to demystify some of the party politics and help women identify which party they might want to work with. And I think part of us encouraging women to stand is making sure women realise there are lots of different roles, that you don't have to go in and stand as an MP straight away. You can take more entry levels. If you can be a campaigner for an organisation or a party, you can stand as a local councillor, and you can sort of work your way up, because it is a marathon, not a sprint. You do have to look at the long game, you know, years and years and years often before people are actually elected. So I think women getting involved with the time and the resource, the availability, women are generally primary caregivers. So whatever they can do at the moment which fits with them is sort of dipping a toe in or getting involved in local politics is probably a really good idea. So seeing more women doing that would be great. And welcomed, by the way, welcome to do that, because we do hear anecdotally that sometimes women, particularly women who have caregiving responsibilities, or disabled women, or women from different backgrounds, more diverse backgrounds, can sometimes face these higher hurdles when they perhaps don't see themselves represented in their local politics and are not warmly welcomed into it. So part of that is a cultural thing. And making sure that the people who are in the local associations are, you know, really open and inclusive. It's making sure that Parliament is open and inclusive, although I would say there has been a lot of strides forward, and perhaps the public isn't aware, because the media reports so much on the negatives, and there are negatives, they do exist. We've just surveyed MPs who are standing down from Parliament, and we know that there are problems that need to be addressed with Parliament as a workplace. But there is work happening. There's the Modernisation Committee headed up by the Leader of the House, Lucy Powell. They are, and she really wants to accelerate things from what I have heard. So there are lots of positive steps, and there's a real sisterhood in Parliament, which never gets reported on, cross-party. So there's a lot of positive there, and perhaps maybe at local level, that's somewhere we need to focus a bit more. And then there's the candidate selections, which I mentioned before. Another of our sister organisations, Centenary Action, are campaigning on Section 106 being fully implemented, which means transparency around candidate selections. So the parties really have to show the public their data on diversity. And that will help, I think, in our organisations really holding them to account and making sure that it's not just lip service, that they are actually working to include a broader range of people, because it's not just about fairness. That is how you get good results. If you know, we don't want carbon copies of the same people governing us. We need a broad range of perspectives, and it really bugs me when people say things about, oh, it should be a meritocracy. It will always be a meritocracy. It will always be the people who are working hardest, especially when people are re-elected, because they've had a chance to prove themselves already. They're not going to get re-elected by their constituents if they haven't done their job properly. So it's just making sure that we have a broader range of people at candidate selections who are being put forward to the public, and then the public votes, and they vote on who they want, on who's been knocking on their door and saying the sort of things, and listening to the constituents and saying the sort of things that they're passionate about and they want to help on. So there's a few different things. There's the pipeline in the first instance, make sure women realise, yes, you can do it. There is no qualification. It's life experience, it's passion, it's commitment. And then it's the candidate selections, and then it's the environment that they're going into. So it's sort of three different things that need to be all targeted. but I really am hopeful. I really believe things are changing and can change more for the positive. I did an event recently, and there was a woman who spoke fantastically, Naomi, and she spoke brilliantly about women's health. And I said to her afterwards, I think you could do it. I think you could stand. And she said, oh, I don't think I'm right, and I don't have the right education. So I think there's a job in dispelling the myths around what sort of person should be a politician, and what sort of background they need to have, or education they need to have. And there's definitely a bit of a confidence gap. We do have a lot of confident women in the 50-50 network, but there is a bit of a confidence gap in some women who are definitely have the skills, but they don't see themselves. And I'm really hoping that with this new intake, with so many women, the women begin to see themselves on the TV and the radio programs, on the panels, and see how many women like them are now in Parliament, and that will be inspiring. And 50-50 definitely does work with those parliamentarians to speak with women who are thinking about standing, to dispel some of those myths and encourage them and give them some confidence to stand. We do a lot of events, such as our Ask Her to Stand campaign and Sign Up to Stand campaign, which do that. And what else are the barriers? So obviously finances and caregiving sort of go in parallel. So women generally earn less than men, so potentially can't take the time off work to do the campaigning, or sort of put in the local political groundwork to be considered for selection. And that also happens with caregiving. So if they have caregiving responsibilities, they are less able to get involved in local politics at the moment, which is why there are drives such as getting more council meetings online, so that is more open for people, not just women, but people who need an extra flexibility can get involved, because that's often the first step. And there's a lot of campaigning, leafleting and canvassing that needs to happen. And historically, men have been more able to do that. But then there are support systems. Some of the parties have support systems for women financially. Elect Her, who we work with, have a fund to help women candidates as well. Because we want people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. We don't want, like I said before, carbon copies from certain backgrounds. And then there's also, like I mentioned before, the environment in Parliament, and hopefully the Modernisation Committee will go some way into creating or building on the changes that have already happened, implementing things from the Good Parliament report. 50-50 submitted some evidence to the Women and Equalities Committee in 2021, suggesting some ideas of things that could be considered to make it a more gender sensitive Parliament. Things like good childcare within Parliament, structured working hours so people know when they're working, when they can be at home with their dependents, electronic voting, again, just using the technology. We're working with Compassion in Politics. We're a very collaborative sector, as I'm sure you could tell, and we're working with them on the tone of Parliament as well, and potentially some women see it as a hostile, sort of bullying environment. I think that is changing. I really have faith in Mr. Speaker, who I met with last week. He's really trying with the increased civility in the chamber. So I'd like to see more of that, and I think that will help. And then there's the elephant in the room, which is safety online from abuse and harassment, and physical safety. And there was a fund announced earlier in the year for increased safety measures and packages for MPs. And it's something that the Jo Cox Foundation, who we also work with, are working really, really closely on. And we back all of the recommendations in the Jo Cox Commission's civility report. There's a whole host of recommendations, down to one which I think is incredibly important, which is education for school children in democracy and the role of an MP, because so much abuse and harassment could be avoided if people knew a bit more about what an MP can and cannot do. And I really strongly believe that. So, and also it starts young with putting the idea in girls' heads that perhaps a career in politics could be something they can see for themselves. So starting young, I think, is really critical with the education piece, and holding the tech companies to account better, because it's obscene some of the things that people are allowed to say to people who are just doing their job. I know that some politicians can rile people. I know everybody's entitled to their opinion, and robust debate and challenging policies is absolutely encouraged and vital for democracy. Abusing people and threatening them, I think, is completely counterproductive and will not encourage the right kind of people to come into our politics.
Thank you so much for sharing all this information with us. And I'm glad you actually mentioned the safety, and we previously touched on that as well. This reminded me when I helped a friend. She's actually a Labour Party MP, and she invited me to participate in canvassing. And it's true that you move around in a group, but you always, you knocking on people's doors, and you don't really know what is going to come out, what they're going to say to you, how they're going to react to what you have to say. And so that it's important that we highlight how much safety is important for women. Again, politics is not free from harassment, as many other fields and as many other environment when it comes to women and gender-based violence and hate speech. Actually, also this make me think about this book, and it's How to Stay Safe Online from Sei Akiwowo. Actually went to her book presentation, and because we talked about resources before, and it's a book that every woman and every man should read. Would you like to highlight some of the most impactful initiatives that 50/50 Parliament has led to increase gender parity in politics? And if there's been any recent success or milestone that you are proud of?
Oh, well, I think our network itself is possibly our greatest success. So as I said, we have over 8,000 women who are interested in 50/50 Parliament and politics, and then over 3,000 women who, in fact, I think it might be more like 3,500 now, who have signed up to stand. Every year on the 21st of November, we have Ask Her to Stand Day, and we get about 200 to 300 women signing up with an interest to stand. And that's not just for a general election, that's for local elections as well. So that's really positive. People speak very highly about the inclusive nature of the network. We see ourselves as the antidote to the Old Boys Club. We're a very supportive group of women, and we do work across the sector with other organisations to support these women to stand for elected office. We've had, I think, 200 women from our network stand for local elections this year, and 101 women from the 50/50 network stood in the general election, 23 of whom were elected. So, and actually we had a shout out last week from Lib Dem MP for Epsom and Ewell, which is Helen Maguire, did us a lovely shout out during her maiden speech about how 50/50 had helped her. So seeing our women, in inverted commas, in the House is just fantastic, and to know we played whether a small part or a big part in them getting there feels really, really good. So yeah, do follow our hashtag Ask Her to Stand campaign over the autumn, and you'll probably see quite a lot of good noise about that.
And what do you envision for the future of 50/50 Parliament?
I'm an incredibly impatient person, and I really think that there are levers that can be pulled to accelerate this. And I really, like I said before, I believe very strongly that it will have positive outcomes for society. So that is the dream within the next 5 to 10 years. So that will look like increasing the number of women we have in our network, increasing the number of women who stand and are elected, and making sure that Parliament, the Environment Parliament, is conducive to these talented, committed women being able to stay, retain their seat, and want to stay to serve their country.
And is there, in your vision, a possible collaboration with other international organizations? Because as we mentioned, and as you told us, you collaborate with many other charities and organizations here in the UK, but we talked about sisterhood before, and I'm just wondering if there is a plan to expand this sisterhood.
Absolutely. And we are already sort of tentatively dipping our toes and talking to sisters and sister organisations in other countries. We are very focused on the UK, and will always be. That will always, until we get or achieve our goal, that will be the priority. But we are really interested in what other countries are doing and sharing learning, particularly countries that are doing better than us, and countries where we think we could help with information on how we are model and how we organise. We are only limited by resources, as we are a tiny charity. So we run off donations. That's tricky because the women and girls sector only receive less than 2% of all funding, and we're a democracy organisation. So some funders are squeamish because they think we're political, which we're not. We support all political parties. We are apolitical. We are about women's representation and democracy. So if we had an injection of funds, then we absolutely could look more at more international links, definitely. And I'm really interested in that because I'm interested in geopolitics, but I'm also like, everything's connected. So not a day goes by where I don't think about women in other countries, such as what's happening in Afghanistan at the moment. And it can feel quite frustrating that you are just completely bound by your own domestic duties, but I've also got to be really careful that I don't sort of get sidetracked from our mission. But I like I said, sorry, to sort of rewind on that a little bit, I do believe we're all interconnected, and what's happening in another country affects us. And having greater representation of women in these other countries has a direct impact on us in the UK. And I think that it's to our benefit that we work with other countries to increase women's representation.
I think there is also inspiration in collaboration, because you might be exposed to ideas or concepts or initiatives that could be inspirational for you, and then you can apply in your country, or the other way around. So this cross-border collaboration, I think it's fundamental. I do have a question, a curiosity about your opinion on quotas.
We are not a homogenous group. We do not all think the same, but the research, the research underpins that when there is greater gender balance, the outcomes are better for all. And if you look at King's College London Institute of Global Women's Leadership, they will point to evidence that more women in power leads to a more caring society. Mm-hmm. So they tend to prioritise healthcare, social care, education. They are less likely to go to war if there is a greater women's leadership, and peace deals are likely to last longer if more women are involved. So the case for having more women involved, beyond it being an issue of fairness, because we are 51% of the population, So it should not be controversial to be asking for an equal say. So equal seats, equal say, as Francis Scott, our founder, said. But not all women think the same. We, as I said, we back women from across the political spectrum. So you are not necessarily going to end up with somebody as a woman MP in your constituency that you necessarily agree with. But that would be the same if it was a man. That's to do with their political persuasion and not their gender. And there are outliers. There are always going to be women whose views we find particularly abhorrent or difficult. And there was a really good phrase from a peace activist, I think she's called Annie, who said that when a man fails, he fails alone. But when a woman fails, all women fail. And there is a real spotlight on women in leadership, and being a perfect sort of model of what a woman in leadership should be, and men aren't held to the same standard, which I find really again a bit bonkers, because we're not talking he's like that and he's a man, he has these terrible views and he's a man. It's just he has these terrible views. So I think, gender is part of it, in that the critical mass, so more women is what sort of indicates these more positive outcomes. But that doesn't mean we're going to agree with all women in the room. And it also means, as you going back to that carbon copy point, yeah, absolutely, we need to broaden out who we're attracting into politics, from what background, and making sure that we are, covering the Black and ethnically minoritized communities, the disabled communities, the low socioeconomic communities, and women, older women, younger women, women in business. Having a broad range is what we're looking for. We can't influence that at 50-50. It's that's up to the electorate and the political parties, but we can influence making sure that women know that if they care, they're qualified, and that they can sign up to stand and give it a go.
My only concern about quotas is that they don't become an exercise as we tick the box, we have more women in more places, but then they don't have a voice, or they don't have actually power to express their opinion or make a change. So it's just a matter of numbers and reaching that equality on paper.
Completely agree with that. I do think quotas are generally a good idea, because they are the one proven thing that works in getting representation. But yes, the structure around, the recruitment or the election process needs to be really transparent, and people need to be given a real choice. But equally, the environment in which they are in, is it an environment that they can thrive? Is the environment somewhere where that woman can voice her views and be supported and supportive? So it's all sort of all of the things working together to make it a more functional elected body. So yeah, I mean, there are going to be, but there's people elected. There are men elected who are, pretty terrible, and they get in. So yeah. I'm not saying let's elect loads of terrible women, but one of the MPs that I've heard said, we'll be equal when we have as many terrible women MPs as we have terrible men MPs. So I think there is a place for quotas, but I do understand the concerns, absolutely. But I think once we are at 50-50 and it's become the norm, quotas aren't necessary anymore, then I think that's where we want to be.
What advice would you give to a young woman who is deciding to pursue a career in politics?
Come to 50-50. Come to one of our online events if you can't make our in-person events, although we are trying to get around the country a bit more. I think it's a really good step into the sisterhood, where you'll be warmly welcomed and learn some good information to demystify some of the process. And I would also just look at Parliament now. and look at the women who are in Parliament now and follow them on social media, see that they are real people and what their real lives are like. Some of the MPs share wonderfully and bravely about their lives. And remember, we are just as good as the men, and the institution's very old, but it's time to change, and you are worthy of being in that sort of institution. So have a look at it, see what gets your blood pumping, and then just do it.
And how about all our fellow journalists that are following us today? What advice would you give to them in order to make their reporting more inclusive, but also more respectful as well?
Absolutely. Well, I think obviously we talk about gender a lot, but maybe just take the gender out of it. And the way that women are described can sometimes be a bit sexist. So their age, whether they're a mum or not, potentially what they're wearing. Women MPs are often described in ways that men aren't. And also have in the back of your mind about safety as well. I think we all have a responsibility. So yeah, just those two things. Have a look and think, we can all do it, like all of us, women and men. So have a look and think, am I being a little bit sexist in this coverage? Am I helping to keep this person safe with this coverage? Sensationalist headlines never help.
And for all the people that are following us, if we want to support you, if we want to donate, if we want to collaborate with 50/50 Parliament, how do we do that and where do we find you?
That's so nice of you to ask, because we really do need more supporters and more funding. So you can become a friend of 50/50 on the 50/50 Parliament website, which is 5050parliament.co.uk. You can give a one-off donation, or you can contact me via the website if you want to give a one-off donation or suggest places that we might go for funding. But we're always open to that. To join our mailing list, and then you'll hear about our events and news, or to sign up to stand yourself. There is no obligation to stand. You literally just fill it in, which is you expressing your interest in getting involved in politics, and then you can become a part of our wonderful community.
Lyanne, this was an incredible conversation. I am so glad we had finally the opportunity to talk. And I am grateful I had the chance to share your story and to learn more about yourself and the amazing work you're doing with 50/50 Parliament. We will follow all the progress, and thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.